In this episode of the podcast, we are going to be talking all about how do you know if when you're trying to build muscle, you're actually making some gains and not just getting fat. That is the key question we want to answer right now. Whether you are bulking, lean bulking, going into a perma bulk, a calorie surplus, or maybe even gaintaining, whatever weird ass word or phrase that the social media gurus or whoever want to throw out there as a label for building muscle, whatever it is that you're trying to do, most of the time you want to actually build muscle, right? You don't want to have a fuck ton of unnecessary body fat coming along with that. So how do you make sure that that's what you're doing? You don't want to fast forward a couple of months and then look in the mirror and think, shit, where is the muscle? I just got fat. So often going into a phase of building muscle comes with a little bit of trepidation because we don't want to make a mistake. You want to build muscle, you don't want to get fat. Maybe you spent months losing body fat in the first place. Maybe you kind of been around that fad diet, yo-yo dieting, loophole roller coaster type thing that has had you tearing your hair out with frustration at trying to lose body fat and never really making the progress that you wanted. And therefore, you get to that stage where you finally achieve the body you're looking for in terms of fat reduction. You're fairly lean, or as lean as you want to be. Now you kind of mentally switch to say, well, actually now I'd like to focus on building some more muscle, but I'm a little bit scared of those extra calories because that could undo the hard work that I've been doing over the course of the last few months. So you're scared of maybe overdoing it on the calories, piling on the unnecessary weight, putting it all back on again. And who in their right mind wants to do that? Who wants to undo all of that good work that they've been doing so far? But there's good news, and you'll be glad to hear it on this podcast. It's not that difficult to track your progress and ensure you're not gaining fat and you are gaining muscle. So let's get through all of the detail and the things that you need to know. First of all, remember that you don't have to be in a calorie surplus in order to build muscle. You can gain in a deficit, you can gain maintenance, but if you're really concerned about fat gain, then maybe spend some time hanging out at maintenance and concentrate on your training. You might find that your gains come quicker than you realize, especially if when you went into the calorie deficit to lose the body fat in the first place, you were relatively new to training. Maybe that process took 3, 4, 5, 6 months, whatever it may be. And you went straight from not doing much weight training straight into a deficit. Well, chances are you could still build quite a bit of muscle at maintenance because relatively speaking, you are new to training. Therefore, your training volume requirements aren't as high as someone who is more well-trained. Therefore, being up at maintenance calories, you could still get quite a decent amount of muscle growth. So if you're really kind of worried about overshooting maintenance, going way into a calorie surplus, putting on excess body fat, well, hang out at that maintenance level and just gain. And if you want to know where maintenance is for you, theoretical maintenance, then there's a link in the show notes of the podcast that will take you to the online calorie calculator. There you can plug in your numbers and you can get your estimated calorie maintenance target. Now remember that it's always an estimate. Any calorie calculator online or wherever is wrong. It's just to what degree is it wrong for you? And that's where you kind of use a bit of trial and error to see what happens. So yes, you'll probably experience a little bit of weight increase initially, but then that'll start to peter out and you'll kind of bubble around one specific number. That kind of is an indicator that you're maintaining, and then focusing on building muscle, focusing on doing the right thing. And in fact, this is something that I'm doing right now with one of my online coaching clients. So what we've done is increase calories from that calorie deficit right up to close to calorie maintenance. We're just testing out where that maintenance point is. So we've increased by about 500 calories, but now we're kind of just testing to see, well, are we still in a deficit or are we genuinely at maintenance? So even with a coach like me, we still go through this trial and error process and just to kind of see what true maintenance is for an individual, because we can use calculators and all that sort of stuff, but nothing gives you better information than the actual individual in front of you, which in my case is a client, in your case is you. So spend that time really trying to figure out where you are. Then what we do is we complement that with a structured 12-week training program that really focuses in on progressive overload. Because what we want to do over the course of a period of time where we're trying to build muscle is really make sure that we are progressing. And we do that through in this case, a periodization approach. So what we do, choose 3 muscle groups that you want to prioritize. I call that tier 1. They're your tier 1 muscle groups. In this case, it was chest, shoulders, biceps. Then you pick another 3 and that becomes tier 2. In this case, it was back, glutes, and triceps. Then you've got everything else. Now, everything else sits at maintenance volume. We just keep it ticking over. It's not to say that we won't build muscle in those areas. It's just not we're specifically focusing in on it in terms of increasing our set volume. So you can still increase repetitions, you can still increase load and progressive overload in those ways. It's just that we're not really focusing in on it from a training volume, i.e. working set point of view. What we then do is then we say, okay, we'll take those tier 1 muscle groups and then we'll progress them from sort of a lowish point where we know we're going to start building muscle to a really high point. So we're really increasing that training volume via sets for those groups. The tier 2, we do an increase, but not as much. And therefore, what we're doing is we're getting a training volume increase in terms of the set volume. We're looking to increase reps, we're looking to increase weight, and we're looking to improve form. So via that structured training program, we can guarantee that we are making progressive overload. And that then gets supported by nutrition. So when we specifically look at protein intake, we want to keep in that 1.8 to 2.2 grams per kilo range while focusing on trying to get that over 4 to 6 servings across the day. And it's early days for this particular client, but I guarantee he will build muscle over the course of 12 weeks and he won't get any unnecessary fat gain because remember, we are hanging out at maintenance. So if you were nervous about getting fat instead of building muscle, if you followed a similar structured approach and started at maintenance, get that structured training program in place because training really is the catalyst for all of that muscle growth. Then focus in on your protein intake, cap calories around maintenance, and do that for about 12 weeks. And I guarantee, unless you are maybe, even if you are well trained, you still build some form of muscle at that point. It might be more challenging, might be more difficult, might be more optimal in a surplus, but you should still be able to do it. But what about if you have set your heart on a calorie surplus? Well, what then? Well, the key thing is you don't need a massive surplus. Research from Eric Helms and his team has shown that a calorie surplus of about 200 to 350 calories might be a good starting point. However, maybe I'd be inclined to be a little bit more conservative. Maybe start around 100 to 200 calories as your initial surplus, just to test the water to see if you've got it right. Because you've got time with this whole thing. You're going to spend a bit of time in a calorie surplus. You're not going to do it for a couple of weeks. You're going to spend time there. So you can just ease into it gently. You could obviously go old school, bang on 500 calories above maintenance and just have no limits whatsoever. But to me, that's kind of counterintuitive if you're trying to manage body fat at the same time. Now, with an increase in calories, in all likelihood, you're going to get some extra carbs in there and so on and so forth. So probably expect some initial scale weight gain in the first few weeks. Now, don't panic. Don't hit the panic button just because the scale weight went up, especially if you've gone from deficit to surplus. That's going to be quite a significant jump in terms of scale weight, driven largely by glycogen and water and things like that. Nothing to worry about, perfectly normal. Just don't panic is what I would say. After that initial period of the rebalancing of glycogen and water, what you should be aiming for is about 0.5 to 1 kilo of total body weight gain over the course of a month. Now, there really is no specifics around the exact targets that you should be aiming for because it's not really like fat loss, which you can get rough estimates for rates of fat loss over time by just looking at the deficit and then trying to make some broad calculation. We can kind of get really reasonably accurate rates of fat loss from there. But with muscle, it's a bit more difficult because muscle isn't driven by calories. Muscle is driven by progressive overload in the gyms, training stimulus. It's driven by protein intake, which is much more difficult, if not nigh on impossible, to actually predict. So what we want to do is say that, okay, this broad range of body weight gain over the course of each month should mean that I'm not actually increasing weight too quickly, which would kind of indicate body fat, but I'm not doing it too slowly, which means I'm not seeing any progress whatsoever. So it's kind of that sweet spot-ish. And you've got to remember that building muscle takes time, and you've got to remember that being in a surplus is probably going to be something that you do for at least double the amount of time that you are in a deficit, although that's just very broad numbers, not really person specific. So if you're over where you want to get to in terms of that 0.5 to 1 kilo per month, if you're over that, reduce calories. If you're under that and not really moving the needle, increase calories. It's as simple as that. Plus, obviously, you've got other mechanisms of measurement that are available to you. You can track progress through your measurements, through progress pictures. You can also look at your training logs. Okay, is your training improving? That training volume improving? Is strength in specific exercises improving? One good way of looking at that is looking at isolation exercises. So for example, if you looked at a leg extension and see how your strength improves over that period of time, well, because there's not many other muscles involved in that other than your quads, then you can kind of extrapolate a little bit better the fact that you should be increasing muscle over the course of time. Now, strength and muscle gain aren't exactly one-for-one correlated, but if you're getting stronger over time, likelihood is you are building muscle at the same time. So to keep tabs on that fat as you go into a calorie surplus, do those sorts of things. Be objective about body composition, look at those pictures objectively and see how your body composition is changing. You could also look at L-carnitine as a supplement you could do to help limit fat gain in a calorie surplus. It's not a magic bullet. It doesn't mean you can go and eat a boatload of calories, but it might have some small advantage. I've done a podcast on that previously, so go check that out if you want it. But essentially, just don't go batshit crazy when the weight starts to increase. Don't go real mental when it comes to increasing your calories, and just keep it nice and steady, and you will build muscle and not gain fat. Well, not gain lots of fat, put it that way.